Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 6 of the Blue Line Report. I'm Jennifer Streeter with my co-host Jake Mazarski, and welcome to episode 6. We kind of got a lot, a lot to talk about today. Jake and I went into this episode like a few days ago just thinking we were going to do a rundown on the new coaching staff and flashing forward to as we're recording today on Saturday, June 14th, and Chris Kreider has been officially traded to Anaheim. So, a lot to cover, I guess. Jake, what are your initial thoughts on all we have to talk about today?
Oh, yeah. I think not only in this series, the Blue Line Report, but in any podcast I've ever hopped on, this might be the most emotional one because I grew up a diehard New York Rangers fan. I was at Chris Kreider's first NHL hat trick against the Vancouver Canucks, and he means a lot to everyone in the New York Rangers faithful. We're about to talk about what this move means for both sides because I'm not saying it's a bad move, but the first thing I'll say is just Chris Kreider is Mr. Ranger, and I will fight anyone on the fact that number 20 should be in the Madison Square Garden rafters. But as always, excited to be back on the pod. It's been a slow offseason for the Rangers so far, even though they have hired Mike Sullivan and made some moves. Things are going to ramp up come July 1st free agency, and we're excited to cover all of that. But the first domino has fell, and that is Chris Kreider, who is the model of what a New York Ranger should be, not only in the past few years, but just in the team's 100-year history. Yeah, it's definitely upsetting and emotional, and there's no better person than the person that I text to cry about the Rangers with that to do this podcast. So let's do it.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. Let's just get straight into it. So the trade was as follows. The New York Rangers received 20-year-old Carey Terrence and a 2025 third round pick. And then, of course, the Anaheim Ducks received Chris Kreider and a 2025 fourth round pick as announced on Thursday. So, just like some initial thoughts is like, I understand that after him essentially having the worst season of his career aside from the COVID year last year. Like, I understand that a lot of people think it was time to trade him, but
Mhm.
like, is that really the best we could do for Chris Kreider?
Yeah, I think in terms of the return, I do think the Rangers did fine. I do think they could have gotten more. But one of the biggest conditions here was the fact that Kreider had a no trade clause and the Ducks were on his no trade list. And so for the Rangers, it was about finding him the best location because I think from what I'm hearing, a lot of the teams that weren't on the no trade list they just weren't making offers for Kreider because they're contenders. He's 34. I will come in this podcast. I think Chris Kreider makes 90% of NHL teams better at this point in time, assuming he's healthy. He's like absolutely no one on the power play since 2012. He leads the league in power play goals. Obviously had that season where he had 50 goals, including like 27 on the power play. We know what Chris Kreider is. And so for an Anaheim Ducks team that is on the up, I mean, you talk about their youth. Trevor Zegras, Bedford native, grew up a New York Rangers fan. I don't know if you saw this right after they traded for Kreider. He posted on his story a picture of the two. That was pretty awesome. Young team, Joel Quenneville coming in. He's one of the best coaches in recent memory. And then you have stars like Cutter Gauthier. You have former Rangers Frank Vatrano, Ryan Strome, Jacob Trouba. And so I think this is a really long-winded answer. I apologize, but the Rangers could have done better, but because Kreider had some control here, I think they did fine, especially because the writing was on the wall.
I mean, sure, but I think for a lot of Rangers fans that no matter what the trade was, it was simply never going to be good enough.
I fully agree with that. And I think the biggest thing that stings for me is look, Kreider didn't have a great year last year. None of the Rangers had a good year last year. I think we talked about this on an earlier podcast. I think the two Rangers that took a step forward last season were Will Cooley and Matt Rempe. Stay tuned for this version of the Rempe report, by the way. It's going to be a good one. I think the biggest thing, the Rangers did not send Kreider outright. If you watch the Islanders season finale at the UBS Coliseum or UBS Arena, apologize, Matt Martin, everybody knew his tenure was coming to an end. Got a standing ovation from the crowd, stick taps. And even though Chris Kreider, his future was uncertain, most people knew that he was playing his last game as a Ranger. I would have loved to see New York do that. And I think this guy is way too legendary for the franchise for him to just be traded the way it is. And so I fully agree with your point. It just feels really underwhelming to see the way he went. And the return, like, is not great. It's a prospect and a pick. That's what you were going to get for him. He's 34. I wasn't expecting them to get too much more, but it was always going to be a sour taste, especially because of the way he left, right?
Yeah. I am just going to go on a tangent right now, and I feel like that's fine. So first, I'm going to present the quote that like the statement that Chris Drury released, right? Like when the trade was announced, kind of like thanking Kreider for everything. And then I'm
Mm.
going to dive into why what he said is not good enough for a lot of people. Okay.
Go for it. I'm here.
We want to thank Chris Kreider for all of his contributions to the Rangers organization over his stellar career. Chris has been an integral part of some of the most iconic moments in Rangers history, including setting multiple franchise records and helping the team advance to the 2014 Stanley Cup final. His leadership on the ice and tireless efforts in the community, which he was recognized for as the inaugural recipient of the Rod Gilbert Mr. Ranger Award, only add to his distinguished Rangers legacy. Chris will always be a Ranger, and we wish him and his family all the best. So that was, Drury's statement when the trade was announced. Good statement. I liked it. But like what I think Drury kind of like overlooks during this trade is like, sure, there are a lot of people who say like it was time for him to be traded, yourself included. I personally think that Kreider is an irreplaceable leader for the New York
Mhm.
Rangers. Like when we're talking off the ice, especially, like, yes, he has so many like all-time ranks on ice, but off the ice, like, I think he is such an integral leader in that locker room that quite simply is irreplaceable. I mean, at there's no other New York Ranger on the roster who has over 12 years of experience playing for the New York Rangers except for Chris Kreider. So I think, and this is something we saw with like a lot of young players coming in recently, like even just last season or the season before with Matt Rempe. Matt's been very public in that Chris was the first New York Ranger who really like relished him with open arms, trained with him throughout all of the off season, and kind of looked at him like kind of as that father figure.
Yeah.
Um, Gabe Perreault, we saw come in right after their Boston College's NCAA tournament run this year. Who else played for Boston College and went on NCAA tournament runs? Chris Kreider. So, like, I just think that Kreider is an integral part of the locker room that as a leader, like I think these young guys coming in, like yeah, there are other like older players on the roster, right? Like JT Miller, um, who can like kind of step up and take that leadership role. But the thing is, like JT Miller literally just got here.
Yeah.
Like he literally just got here from Vancouver. So it would have been nice had they just gave Kreider like maybe one more year to redeem himself and then just let him retire. In
Yeah. I
my
mean,
opinion.
oh, sorry. Keep going. Keep going.
No, that's it. That's my opinion.
Have you seen the picture of the 2014 team on the plane holding the
Oh my gosh,
line?
yes, where they black out everyone who's gone.
Yeah, they black out everyone who's gone, and now it's
Here,
only
we'll
JT
insert
Miller.
here. We'll insert here.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with most of what you say. One thing I don't agree with, you said I think Chris Kreider is irreplaceable. I say I know he is. There's a reason why after every Rangers win in the past 10 years since Chris Kreider became what could be considered an NHL veteran, he was the last Ranger on the ice.
Hmm.
And he did the hug with Mika Zibanejad. Even before that, he would just stand there and make sure everyone went off. His impact off the ice. You look, stats are stats, and I am going to go to stats every time to show that Chris Kreider should be considered the last Ranger to wear number 20. In
Hmm.
terms of his role inside this Rangers organization, the New York Rangers' success is unprecedented outside of winning a Stanley Cup since Chris Kreider got here.
Hmm.
Since 2012, they are second in the NHL in Eastern Conference final appearances or conference final appearances, even with five: 2012, 2014, 2015, 2022, 2024. One team more, Tampa Bay Lightning. We know what they are, right? None of that is possible without Chris Kreider.
Yeah.
And so, even if you're losing a guy, and Chris Kreider, he's not in his prime anymore, and we can all agree that, and his production has taken a step back. but you need a culture and you need some sort of leadership. And I do think the Rangers still have that leadership core. We all knew it was going to be shaken up going into this offseason, and Kreider was going to be a domino to fall. None of the success the New York Rangers have had in the past 10 years is possible without him. And so while you're losing a player that might not produce the same way he did, what I think a lot of people are overshading is you're losing someone that embodies what the New York Rangers are. And so that's the biggest thing that stings right now.
Yeah, I think Jake, you touched on a lot of like team stats that Kreider helped contribute to. I'm going to touch on a few of his individual stats right now.
Yeah.
So his 326 goals and 256 assists for a total of 582 points. That's the 10th most in franchise history right now. Let's also remember that he's the top goal scorer in Rangers playoff history, recorded 48 goals and 76 points in over 120 career Stanley playoff games, 123 to be specific.
Yep.
So like yes, he's that's not what he's recording now, obviously, but I'm with you on like number 20 should be retired, number 20 should be hung in the Raptors. Like that should not even be a question.
Yeah, and I think like a lot of people on the other side that say number 20 shouldn't be retired, it's because Kreider might not have been the guy on a Rangers team. And I don't agree with that one because he's been the team's leading scorer multiple years. He is the only, if you're talking solely about the playoffs, right? Leading goal scorer, leading shorthanded goal scorer, leading power play goal scorer. He's the only Ranger besides Mark Messier and Wayne Gretzky to score a hat trick in a single period. And that happened last year against Carolina in Game 6 when New York had its backs against the wall. He's the only Ranger besides Rod Gilbert and why am I blanking out on the other guy? John Rattel, who have scored 300 goals. And so any stat that you're going to pull up for a Rangers great, Chris Kreider's right there. And you look at all the guys in the Raptors right now. There are multiple people that have not won a cup that still deserve to be in the rafters. Henrik Lundqvist, right? Raj Gilbert never won a cup. There are plenty of others. And so Chris Kreider, what he did for this organization and the reason the Rangers have been relevant, he's at the center of it. If you take Chris Kreider out, you're not getting that. You're not getting any of that. And I'll show you that once I do this Kreider segment in a second. This guy just means so much to this organization. I will fight anyone that says he shouldn't be in the Raptors because there's so many reasons why. And I know people are going to say last season put a stain on it because there are rumors about his involvement in the locker room because the Rangers did have a lot of off-ice problems. That's not only on Chris Kreider, and the good should absolutely outweigh the bad because there's not that many bad, and boy, is there a hell of a lot of good.
Let's also like remember that when we're talking about like the negative off ice energy we're talking about from this most recent season, let's also remember that then head coach Peter LaViolette literally stood in front of the media and said that he straight up doesn't go into locker rooms after a loss. So
Exactly.
you look at players for like exactly like we were talking about Chris Kreider that literally have to play the role of head coach in the locker room post game to this team, which
Oh,
is
totally.
which is
Sorry.
just another reason going back to what you and I are both saying about how he's irreplaceable as a leader. I
Yeah, and I
want to get
think
into
what
your Kreider segment, but I think before we do that, we have to talk about Mika's goodbye.
Yeah, let's talk about it. One thing I was going to mention very fast because I felt like it was a good metaphor and literal thing. He literally put the team on his back. He was playing with a back injury the entire season.
Literally,
He literally put the team on
and
his back.
vertigo.
Yeah, no, he literally put the team on his back and he was playing through it. And you could tell how much the guy cared. Like, you could tell how much the guy cared. And so, yeah, let's get into the Mika goodbye because honestly, that I was ready, not ready to move on, but. Mika Zibanejad is another guy that embodies a Ranger, and reading his goodbye, and I'll let you take the lead on this. Jesus, I don't know how if you're a Rangers fan, you don't get upset with
Okay,
that.
I want to start by talking about the timing and
Yeah,
that he literally waited like over 24 hours to post it once the
right?
news dropped. And I think what that shows is that he literally had to wait 24 hours to like process and figure out what he was going to say, which I
Yeah.
think means a lot and is really cute. Also, before we get into his, Mika's wife Irma also took to Instagram and kind of like she shared the like Rangers video that they posted about him, and then she posted like a TikTok of Mika and Kreider together, and then she released her own statement like thanking the Kreiders and how they've like brought up their kids together and just overall really, really sweet. And then that was followed by Mika's message. I'm staring at the quotes. I'm going to read it for everyone here. Let's all take a deep breath collectively before. Okay. I'm incredibly lucky to have had the pleasure of playing with you for almost 10 years, but that's nothing compared to the pleasure of getting to know you and becoming best friends. You took me in from day one. You've taught me everything and what it means to be a ranger. You've always had my back, no matter what. From being kids to having kids of our own. It's a journey that doesn't end here. This is a friendship for a lifetime, teammates or not. Me and my family will always be grateful for you and your family. Lastly, I just want to wish you all the best in Anaheim. They're lucky to have such an amazing player, person, and teammate. This is a friendship for a lifetime, teammates or not. Like, just gonna reiterate that line that he said earlier. This is a friendship for a lifetime, teammates or not. Like, that is just so crazy. Like,
So crazy.
that is insane.
How wax poetic is it that Chris Kreider's last ever Rangers goal was assisted by Mika Zibanejad, and Mika Zibanejad's last goal of the season this year was assisted by Chris Kreider? I'm gonna put my phone case up, and I
Love
hope you
it.
guys all look at that. I'm covering Artemi Panarin right now. Artemi Panarin's here, but like
He's not
those two
there.
were the definition of inseparable.
Yeah.
And Jesus, I mean, look, like you could. Zibanejad and Kreider have not been great at 5v5 the last few years, and they definitely didn't have a great year last year. And they definitely, on ice wise, were one of the reasons the Rangers weren't as good. If you're talking about just bonds in the NHL, and it might be because we're so submerged in it, it's very hard to find those two. It's a reason why those two are the last two off the ice. I'll say the same thing I said a few minutes ago. Those two are the Rangers. And I think if you talk about any Ranger, whether it's Mika Zibanejad, who's been here for 7, 8 years now, or it's Matt Rempe or Gabe Perreault, who played 7 games, everyone has a Chris Kreider memory.
Exactly. I do also want to add that I didn't pronounce it just because I don't speak Swedish, but he did also end the message with like a Swedish phrase, and it translates to always regardless at the very like end of his little like Instagram caption, which I thought was very profound. For those looking to like learn more about the Mika and Kreider off ice on ice bond, I did just publish an article over at Blue Line Station which literally says farewell to their entire bond and kind of highlights some of their milestones that they accomplished together if you want to check that out. But with all of this being said, while I do have strong opinions on Kreider, I have only known the New York Rangers as a sports reporter. I haven't really known them too much as a fan or coming from like a family of hockey fans. My co-host Jake has literally been brought up on New York Rangers hockey. So I would love to see him do kind of like a segment on your top 10 Chris Kreider moments.
Let's get into it. Yeah, so I bleed the New York Rangers. I am someone that wants to go into the hockey world, and Blue Line Station has given me my first opportunity to do that and cover hockey. And I've grown so much since I've been at this site. But even before that, yeah, the New York Rangers, like I was literally born with a Rangers jersey on. And look, I've talked about my fandom so much. You can see it behind me. I was at Chris Kreider's first career hat trick against the Vancouver Canucks in 2013 when he stared down John Tortorella, who was fired in the offseason before. That is moment number 7. I'm going to give you my top 10 Chris Kreider moments. There are so many more off this list too, and I want to preface it like that. And one more thing I'll say before I hop into it, the Rangers handled this very well. It seems like they were very communicative, and that's a big thing because of what happened last year with Barkley Goodrow and Jacob Trouba. Rangers needed to send him out right. Chris Drury, fine job there. Anyway, top 10 Chris Kreider moments. Let's see if I can do this without tearing up. Let's start off with the honorable mention, which I mentioned already. His final goal for the Rangers to make it 2-0 against the Tampa Bay Lightning, assisted from Mika Zibanejad. Obviously, the game was meaningless, but it was Kreider's final game as a Ranger, Sam Rosen, and Joe Micheletti's final game in the broadcast booth. Yeah, just meant a lot. All right, number 10. And Jenny, you're going to know a bunch of these too because you've been around the Rangers long enough. The 2022 Eastern Conference Finals, less than 2 minutes in, Chris Kreider scores the opening goal against the Tampa Bay Lightning. Number 9, 2022 Game 7 against the Carolina Hurricanes. The Rangers did not win a game in Carolina before this. They entered as a plus 200 underdog. Everybody thought the Rangers season was over. Kreider, goal to make it, power play goal to make it 2-0. And then Carolina started knocking on the door when it was 3-0. Beginning of the third period, the Rangers seemed like they had control. Carolina was getting there. Chris Kreider, breakaway, puts his second goal of the game. Rangers win game 7, magical year. Number 8, same year, 2022, game 7, just around before against Pittsburgh, the opening goal off a pass from none other than Mika Zibanejad. Right. Number 7, his first NHL hat trick in 2013 against the Vancouver Canucks. I urge everyone to go watch what Chris Kreider looked like in that. He's unrecognizable. And there's so many things that add on to it. The Rangers were wearing their alternate blue jerseys. John Tortorella, his former coach, who called up Chris Kreider for the first time in the 2012 Stanley Cup playoffs, was on the opposing bench. A lot of stuff there. And speaking of John Tortorella, number 6 is Chris Kreider's first NHL goal against the Ottawa Senators in Game 6 of the second round when Kreider scored the game-winning goal when New York was down 3-2 in the series at Ottawa, forced a game 7. Rangers won the game 7, made it to the Eastern Conference Finals for the first time. Kreider got called up less than a week before that. He made an impact from pretty much day one. Number 5, 2015 game 6 against the Washington Capitals. Now, New York score or won game 5 to make it 3-2 series, but they really struggled at Washington that series. And less than a minute in, Chris Kreider scores a breakaway backhand. Top shelf sets the tone for that game. Rangers win that game 4-3. We know what happened in that series. Now I take a deep breath. Before I go into my next 5, which one's your favorite out of those?
I mean, my favorite is your number one. So I'm choosing silence.
All right, valid. Let's get into it then. Number Oh, I'm on number 4. Number 4. Now, this one might be high because the Rangers lost this game, but in their magical year where they made it to the Stanley Cup final, they were losing to the Montreal Canadiens in Game 3 at Madison Square Garden, their first home game of the Eastern Conference Finals, less than a minute remaining. Kreider scores a game-tying goal. The Garden erupted. Erupted. The Rangers lost that game in overtime, but that is one of my favorite Chris Kreider memories. Net front goal, like always. Started putting his hand like this, waving his hand. That place erupted. Chris Kreider meant so much that day. Rangers obviously won the series, made the Stanley Cup. Number 3, the President's Trophy winning New York Rangers down 3-1 against the Washington Capitals. Their offense was lifeless for 3 straight games. They're down 1-0 with 148 remaining. Henrik Lundqvist skating to the bench. Chris Kreider scores the game tying goal. You go watch the camera. He's literally about to step on the bench, and Kreider scores, puts his hands up. New York wins that game in overtime off a Ryan McDonagh goal. They win the series coming back from a 3-1 deficit. Chris Kreider played an instrumental part in that. That goal is unforgettable. Number 2, not a playoff moment. This is honestly my one non-playoff moment on here, but there are so many regular season ones too, like when he hit 300 Rangers goals in Arizona. April 12th, 2022, when Kreider scored his 50th goal. He never scored 28 before that, and then he scored 28 power play goals that season. That was incredible. Rangers made the Eastern Conference Finals, start of a new era there. And then number 1. I mean, I'm literally gonna let you take this one. Everyone knows number 1.
Yeah, I mean, I just think obviously the third period hat trick versus Carolina. I think for so many New York Rangers fans, when you ask them what was your favorite Chris Kreider moment, that's what they're gonna say. This is your segment, so you go more in depth, but yeah.
Yeah, I think everybody knows what it's going to be. I said it a few minutes ago, he's the only New York Ranger besides Wayne Gretzky and Mark Messier to score a hat trick in a single period in the postseason. And he did it when New York was had their backs against the wall. I understand they were up 3-2 in the series, but every sign was pointing towards Carolina forcing a game 7. The Rangers were lifeless in that game. They were down 3-1. Evgeny Kuznetsov said it in the pregame press. He's just like the Rangers are entering hell, and it looked like they were going back. And I thought the Rangers were going to lose Game 7 too. Chris Kreider put the team on his back, 3 goals, including one with just over 4 minutes remaining to give New York the lead in a season where they set franchise records in points, wins, made the conference final. There's nothing more storybook than that. And though, also just to end this, after that, you did not see one tweet saying Chris Kreider did not deserve to have his number in the rafters. Everybody thought he should have. And I
Yeah.
want people to remember that because he absolutely does. In that moment, it's very rare you see that in any franchise's history. There's very few that moment's unforgettable. And
Yeah.
so, just from a Ranger fan, before we move on, and someone that grew up on this, thank you, Chris Kreider. You're legendary, and I can't wait to tell my kids about you because you deserve to have your number up there and stories told.
Yeah, I agree. I do want to piggyback. I know you said most of them are playoff moments. Let's
Yeah,
remember that your honorable mention, the final goal for New York Rangers, that was also a regular season moment.
facts.
So
Very true.
Yeah. I guess before we get into the new coaching stuff, I also want to thank Chris Kreider, just coming in as a sports reporter covering the New York Rangers. He really gave me a lot of storylines in the sense of his leadership and was super fun to watch on the ice. Also, a really funny person to interview overall. So, thank you, Chris Kreider, and we're all very excited to see what you do in Anaheim. And I know a lot of people are going to be excited to see Mika and Kreider face off as opposing team members. So I think that will still be really fun, even though we all kind of hate to love to see it, kind of.
Yeah, not for real.
All right, little cleanser before we go into the new coaching staff. We're gonna hit y'all with keeping up with the Rempies as always. He has officially begun off-season training, as has everyone. I'm going to insert a little screenshot here of him in the weight room that's been going around Twitter that people have been going crazy for. But I'm also just waiting to see like if he's gonna release a statement or what he's gonna say about the Kreider trade, simply because in quite literally every on-camera interview Matt has done whenever he gets a question about like, oh, like who was your mentor? Like who do you train with? He never fails to mention Kreider. He always talks about how much of an influence Kreider has played on his career. I have a quote. You know me, I'm the quote girl. He said, he's helped me so much. Last year we sat next to each other on the plane and he gave me tons of advice. He's a really smart guy. I can't speak highly enough of him. I'm going to repeat that last line. I can't speak highly enough of him. So I do think Matt is also one of the players who's eventually going to sound off on Kreider's departure just because of how complimentary he's been. You know, there's also like so many clips of them like on ice together where like Kreider's mocking the fact that Rempe's the enforcer and is like low key like punching Matt, which I think is really funny. But I also want to mention this is going to be Matt's first off-season training without Chris Kreider. For every single other off-season he's been at for New York Rangers training, he's always said that Kreider has been kind of the main person he trains with, and that's not going to be the case anymore this off-season. So I'm kind of curious to see what that does to his off-season training and how that impacts his development.
Yeah, no, for real. It's a big change, not only for Rempe, but for every New York Rangers, not only youngster, but veteran, because of how many things go into the NHL offseason. And Rempe, one of the things that he really worked on last offseason was his skating. Going into skating lines during training camp, he was coming in first and second place, apparently. And when he came in second, it was behind Chris Kreider. So it's obviously a big change, and not having that veteran presence, like a veteran's a veteran, but no, not every veteran's Chris Kreider. So
And not every a veteran is a veteran, but not every veteran is an over 10-year veteran for the same franchise. So,
exactly, exactly. I mean, like his impact cannot be stated enough, and I hope that everybody realizes that. And I know that all these Rangers that are going to be here for a while, they're going to take the lessons that he puts. So I'll leave it like that.
yeah, I guess real quick, in addition to Kreider being traded away, now that we're mid-June, we do have the full new coaching staff for the New York Rangers for next year. Obviously, Mike Sullivan was hired on May 2nd, who returns to Broadway after 10 seasons with the Pittsburgh Penguins. I do like the fact that it's kind of like a coming home storyline just because he previously served as an assistant under John from 2019 to 2013. What's really interesting about this new coaching staff is that two of the three are making the jump over to the Rangers from Pittsburgh and sort of following Mike.
Mhm.
Which I really like. That really shows, I guess, how much Mike values his assistant coaches and how much they value him. So first, we'll start off with good old Joe Sacco. His announcement is unique in that, unlike the two others that we're about to get into who are following Sullivan over from Pittsburgh. He is coming under Sullivan's charge after serving as the interim head coach for the Bruins and also does hold a Jack Adams nomination.
Yeah, Joe Sacco is one of the guys who last year took over for Jim Montgomery once Boston fired him. Jim Montgomery led the Bruins to the best NHL season ever, and Joe Sacco was there for that behind the bench too. And so that's obviously a really big thing. This is a common theme that we're going to see as Jenny keeps introducing these guys. A lot of head coaching experience, whether with the Rangers or other people. This guy, Sacco, for the second half of last season, coached Brad Marchand before they traded him. David Pastrnak. One of the reasons I do think the Rangers make an offer to Brad Marchand is because Sack goes behind the bench, and the Rangers need a guy like that. So I definitely think he's going to be helpful. And yeah,
I'm going to go through the last two. We do have David Quinn, who's returning to the Rangers as he was a former Rangers rookie coach, who stood behind the bench from 2018 to 2021. He then reunited with Sullivan in Pittsburgh, last year. In his previous role with Pittsburgh, with Sullivan, Quinn was responsible for overseeing the team's development, or excuse me, the team's defensemen and managing the power play unit. He knows Sullivan well. They used to be teammates all the way back in Boston University, so we're talking about like a long time bond here, like two coaches who've known each other since their college years. Then we have Ty Hennes, who began his tenure with the Pittsburgh Penguins as the team's skating and skills coach. So that one's who's kind of more of the development guy. Um, he was also promoted to assistant coach in November of 2022. And I think that going back to Rempe, I think this is who Rempe is going to connect the most with, simply because Ty's coaching style is more known for emphasizing player development alongside skills enhancement with a heavy focus on skating techniques, right? That's something we were just saying that Matt's really focused on his skating techniques right now. So I definitely
yeah.
think that's going to be a cool bond that we're going to see there.
Yeah, and I think you could go back to the early 2000s and say the Rangers have had a problem developing draft picks and making them full caliber NHL players. And you're going to start the season at least with a bunch of young players like Matt Rempe, Alexis Lafreniere, Brendan Othman, Gabe Perreault, Brett Berard. They should all get ice time and should be on the opening night roster. And so to have Hennis there will be huge because you want to develop these guys into full-time NHLers. And for Quinn, I mean, look, I've talked about David Quinn forever. He's the reason the Rangers power play has been so good for years. And even after him, that Rangers power play had some chemistry because of him. There were a lot of things that didn't work during the Quinn era, and we could get into that another time, but he's in a different role now, and I think people have to recognize that.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess we'll go ahead and end it there. We covered so much this episode just because there was so much going on, but this was
Yeah.
episode 6 of the Blue Line Report. As always, be sure to tune in to bluelinestation.com to read more about the New York Rangers in addition to listening to Jake and I. But so long for now, and enjoy the rest of everyone's weekend since we're recording this on a Saturday and releasing it on a Saturday. Maybe pour one out for Chris Kreider. So cheers.
Thank you, 20. Thank you, 20, for real. From
Yeah.
all of us. Yeah, we'll talk to you guys soon.